Chapter 11, Effective Learning Environment. The organizing questions for this chapter are, what is an effective and learning environment? Like, what's a good classroom look like, an effective classroom look like? And when we look at that, we have to look at what is the impact of time on learning. We have to look at what practices contribute to having effective classroom management. We also have to look at what some strategies for managing routine misbehavior. And we also have to look at, we're going to look at applied behavior analysis, because sometimes you'll have some more serious behavior problems in your classroom, and ABA, or applied behavior analysis, tends to work with those kids. And then how can serious misbehaviors be prevented? Because we really don't want to have to deal with them, you want to prevent them. So an effective learning environment is creating effective environments which involve strategies that teachers use to maintain appropriate behavior and respond to misbehavior in the classroom. It's pretty much what makes your class run smoothly. And what you really want it to do is to increase the potential for students to learn. Keeping students interested and engaged and showing enthusiasm are probably the most important thing in preventing misbehavior. You're going to hear me say this over and over again throughout the entire chapter, because that's the number one thing. Creating an effective learning environment is a matter of knowing a set of techniques that children can learn it too, but teachers learn to apply. This is the number one reason why teachers leave the field, classroom management. And it's also the number one reason why teachers get fired or let go. One of the first things that principals are going to look at is the impact of time on learning. How much time are you actually spent teaching children? Allocated time is the time available for instruction. Some of this stuff is out of your control, but most of it is in your control. Methods for maximizing allocated time is preventing late starts and early finishes. You need to be ready. You have to be prepared, have your materials out a little bit early, have everything ready for whatever period if you're teaching, first through fifth period, you're going to have them out there. If you're rolling through the day, you're going to think, what do I need at 1 o'clock? What do I need now? If you got a break in between, then you can, pull some stuff together then. But you should be able to have all that stuff pulled together prior to that, so that things move really slowly. Your transitions move slowly. Excuse me. Preventing interruptions. And this is interruptions throughout the day. When I was in elementary and worked in an elementary school, I had centers. And one of the reasons I had centers was so that I could work with small groups of children, and then they would rotate through the centers. And that would give me time to work, in small groups or one-on-one with specific kids. So while the other kids were working in their other centers, or sometimes they would be doing seat work, where they would be in their seats and doing like packets of work, like reinforcements and stuff. While they were doing that, I had little cards that they would hold up, like I have to go to the bathroom, and sentence strips. And they were kind of young, so they had a hard time reading, and it would be like sentence strips, such like that. And so they would hold them up, so I could just nod at them and tell them that they could do, I need a question. I have a question. I need to go to the bathroom. May I sharpen my pencil? Will you check this? And if I had, they would look at me and I'd say, will you check that? And I would put my finger for 1 minute, meaning that give me a minute so that I can wrap this up here. And then I would give them a little hand signal for them to come over. So that was like, it didn't allow the group to lose focus, because I could just kind of look up over at them and be able to go along with what they were doing. Handling routine procedures. That's a routine procedure, smoothly and quickly. You've got to think about how many times, can kids just get up and go get a drink of water? When do you want them to sharpen their pencils? What is your bathroom routine? And how do they ask for going to the bathroom? Do you have specific times that they can and cannot go to the bathroom? Moving into groups, that's another one that's a big idea. A big time waster. You want kids to get into pairs, or you want them to get into groups of 3, or you want them to get into groups of 5. If you already have them grouped, it's fine, but sometimes you don't want them to be grouped. So then how do you spread them out? What is your testing procedure? If you've got them in groups, you might not want to have them sitting, 4 inches away from each other. So what is your testing procedures? And then you want to minimize that time spent on discipline. When we look at this pie chart in figure 11.1, you can see that about 60% of the day is actually spent just on teaching. So you're losing 40% of your day on other things, like just no math was being occurred in 11% of the days of scheduled. It could be field trip, teacher absence, standardized tests, school events. About 17% was non-instructional activities, such as late starts, announcement, passing out materials. And students just not engaged in learning was an additional 12% of the total time. Sharpening pencils, daydreaming, just goofing off, assignments finished early with nothing to do. A big part of this, a lot of times, is that when you're talking about quick starts, kids will come in and sometimes kids are a little bit late and you hate to start when not everybody's there. So a lot of teachers will do something called a bell ringer. And what the bell ringer is it's an activity to do right when the kids come into school or right when they come into the classroom. If you switch classes, then it's a perfect thing to have as a bell ringer. And it has usually not anything new that they're learning. It could be like a review, that you're doing some kind of review with them, something they learned weeks ago, so you can see whether or not they retained it. I used a lot of time logic puzzles, and I would do logic puzzles with them, and they got bonus points and stuff for being able to work through logic puzzles. And the nice thing about that, too, was they loved them. They absolutely loved them. And then they could go check their answers and stuff like that. And then I also had this thing that if you finished your work early, which some kids work at different paces and some kids get it done, as long as I would have them come check it, I'd come check their work when they were doing their independent practice towards the end of the class period. But then I would also, there were two things that you could do. You could do more logic puzzles, or some other kind of puzzle, or you could read. And you had to have a book there available that was, like your free reading time. So it was one or the other that you could do. Using engaged time effectively. So when kids talking about doing engaged time, we're talking about time on task. So time that kids are actually doing what they're supposed to be doing. Their assigned work. So teachers can maximize engaged time by teaching engaging lessons. Remember I said I was going to say this more than once? You want to make sure your lessons are exciting and that kids are excited to learn about them. But you also want to keep the pace going. You've ever been in a classroom where, you knew the stuff, or at least you were learning it, but it was so slow you couldn't believe how slow it was? So you want to maintain that momentum. And sometimes when you go looking for a paper, you say, oh, let me look this up. You lose that momentum. And that is that idea of establishing smoothness of instruction, that you've got things planned out, so you're passing stuff out. You're got your PowerPoints already pulled up. Maybe your website's pulled up. So then you also want to make sure that you manage transitions well. And that means like moving from maybe if in elementary school from math to reading to language arts, like how do kids line up? Some teachers will waste like 10 minutes just lining their kids up to go to lunch or go to special area. So having procedures for those things really help out. Also maintaining group focus. This is an important one. That there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. Some teachers will do, and they'll do some kind of little catchy little pattern that goes along with it. Some teachers will just go boys and girls, or 1, 2, 3, eyes on me, 1, 2, eyes on you. There's a lot of different little chants that you can do. Okay, so we've been talking about maintaining group focus and overlapping. I'm going to show you a little video of a teacher that's setting up classroom procedures in the beginning, and then I'll talk to you a little bit about how she does this maintaining group focus. And Ron Clark Academy uses this a lot, and the kids love it. Oh, wrong one, sorry. Right here it is.
All right, so right now we are going to learn some sayings that I like to use in class, and it's going to be used to get your attention, to make sure that we're all on the same page and that you know what's going on, okay? So I've got 4 of them that I like to use here, and if you ever need to remember what they are, they're up here. And I say something, and then you say something. We're not saying the same things though, okay? So the first one, whenever I say macaroni and cheese, you guys have to say, everybody freeze. Okay, so I say macaroni and cheese, you say everybody freeze. You want to try it?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Macaroni and cheese.
Everybody freeze.
Good. Macaroni and cheese.
Everybody freeze.
Now sometimes I'm going to do it really fast. Macaroni and cheese.
Everybody freeze.
Very good. Okay. We'll come back to that. I'll quiz you later. Next one. I say Tootsie Roll Lollipop. You say, we've been talking, now let's stop. Now this one's kind of harder because what you say is a little bit longer, but you'll feel that rhythm in it, okay? So I go Tootsie Roll Lollipop. We've been talking, now let's stop. You want to try it?
Yes.
Okay. Tootsie Roll Lollipop.
We were talking, now let's stop.
That was really good. That was really good. Let's try it again. Tootsie Roll Lollipop.
We've been talking, now let's stop.
Macaroni and cheese.
Everybody freeze.
Tootsie Roll Lollipop.
We've been talking, now let's stop.
Try it faster. Tootsie Roll Lollipop.
We were talking, now let's stop.
Oh, okay, that was a little shaky. We'll come back to it. All right, next one. I say ready to rock. You say ready to roll. I say ready to rock. You say ready to roll. Want to try it? Ready to rock?
Ready to roll.
Ready to rock?
Ready to roll.
Ready to rock?
Ready to roll.
Okay, you got it. All right, and the last one we're going to use is I say hocus pocus. You say everybody focus. So I say hocus pocus. You say everybody focus. Ready? Hocus pocus.
Everybody focus.
Well, let's try to stay together. Hocus pocus.
Everybody focus.
Hocus pocus.
Everybody focus.
Ready for quiz time?
Yes.
Think you can handle it?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. Ready to rock?
Ready to roll.
Macaroni and cheese.
Everybody freeze.
Macaroni and cheese.
Everybody freeze.
Ready to rock?
Ready to roll.
Hocus pocus.
Everybody focus.
Tootsie Roll Lollipop.
We were talking, now let's stop.
Oh my goodness, that was really good. I think that's the best you've ever done it. Tootsie Roll Lollipop.
We were talking, now let's stop.
Macaroni and cheese.
Everybody freeze.
Hocus pocus.
Everybody focus.
Hocus pocus.
Everybody focus.
Hocus pocus.
Everybody focus.
All right, so when we look at that and we look at her teaching that routine, one of the things that you realize is that she's setting up expectations. In the Ron Clark Academy, when we were there, he would do that. He would say, theirs was, hoo-ha, shark bait. And the kids would pound on the desk. He'd say, shark bait. And they go, hoo-ha. And when they had to all be looking at him and pounding on the desk. And if they weren't, they got a sign in. And if they got 3 sign-ins in one class period, which they switch for reading and math and stuff like that, because it's 5th, 6th, and 7th, and 8th grade, I think it is. I think it's 4 years. Then they had to stay after school. They had some kind of community service that they had to do within the school. Another part of that is overlapping, and there's a couple things that I talk about here with overlapping. It's the ability to do more than one thing at a time, that you're watching the kids, you're teaching your lesson, you have a lot of different things that overlapped at once. Teachers have, I forget, there's some statistic of how many decisions a teacher makes a day, and it's a lot. And there's also this thing which this chapter should talk about, but I didn't see it in here, and they usually do, is talk about with-itness. With-itness, I'm not sure we can teach. It's that ability to know, kind of like eyes in the back of your head, know what's going on in the classroom pretty much at all times. So one of the things we do know about time on task, you can overdo it. If you've ever been in a classroom where kids are there, it's almost like they're afraid to think outside the box. They're just, it's like ditto or worksheet to death, where they just get worksheet. And a lot of studies have found that even though you increase time on task, it looks like the kids are constantly busy. Students, and they're reasonably well behaved, it doesn't increase their achievement. An overemphasis on time on task can be detrimental to learning, because the brain takes a little while to process stuff, and complex tasks actually take a lot of creativity, and uncertainty tends to produce lower levels of time on task. So than simple cut and dry things. So sometimes kids need time to think. They need that think time to let that idea percolate a little bit. Yet it would be clear in poor instructional strategies to just avoid complex tasks all the time. And you don't want to give them too much time to percolate. Actually, if you look at Finland, and I talk a lot about Finland because it's considered to be like a mecca of teaching and appropriate teaching strategies. They actually have in-class time about an hour and a half, and then they have a 30-minute break every hour and a half for a recess, so that the teachers can kind of get their stuff together for the next hour and a half of class of instructional time that they have. And then the kids can also have time to just let their brain kind of wander and let those ideas percolate a little bit. Sometimes I even tell them to think about stuff before they go out. Just think about it. And then they go out and they play and they run and they think, and then they come back and they have a little bit more time to pull their thoughts together when they're doing that. So we're going to look at classroom management in a student-centered classroom. If we go back to chapter 1, when we look at Danielson's model and Marzano's model, in order to be a distinguished teacher, you have to allow the students to take charge of their own learning. That's how you get to that distinguished level. When you look at proficient and distinguished teachers kind of give up the authority and they give up the control of the classroom and allow the students to start taking ownership of their own learning. So if you start setting up your classroom with that idea in mind, then you're going to get there at a much quicker pace. So one of the things that they look at with this is that in student-centered classroom management is more participatory, that kids actually have a say in how their class runs and some of the things that go on with their classroom. They're involved in setting that standard of behavior. And so you can say things like, do you think this makes us the best classroom, the best fifth grade class? What does it take? You all want to graduate if you're talking to high school kids. My job is to make sure someday you get a job. Some of you want to go on to college, some of you don't. Some of you want to go into a vocational program, some of you just want to get a job. My job is to make sure you're going to be successful when you get that job. And so what do we need to have? What kind of rules and procedures do we have in this classroom to make this the most conducive learning environment so that we can all reach the goals that we're trying to obtain? And so typically that means you have rules and you have procedures, and rules need to be communicated and they need to be consistently communicated. So you have to follow them at all time. You can't say, well, today I'm in a bad mood, so these are the rules today. Tomorrow I'm going to be in a good mood and I'm going to let them be lax. You have to follow them. Now, that doesn't mean that there has to be like some kind of extreme form of punishment. When I taught, and I've told you guys, I taught in an EBD, emotionally and behaviorally disturbed center for a long time, for probably like 7 years. And I look at that, and I had kids that would cuss a lot. They came from the shop class, and for some reason in shop, they thought it was okay to cuss. So they come from the shop class, and they were dropping F-bombs and all kinds of words all the time. And I would say to them, you can't do that. And they'd say, yeah, it's no big deal. I'm going to be a mechanic. I'm going to do this. And I'd say, I don't care where you're going to work. Like, you don't walk into 7-Eleven and say, yo, bitch, what do you want? What do you want? And they would look at me like, oh my God. And I'd usually say, yo, B. But I'd say, you will get fired. If you use that kind of language in a job, you're going to get fired. And they would be hemming and hawing. I'd say, the bottom line is school is not the place for that kind of language. And I wasn't saying that that's a horrible language and, oh, you're going to go to hell or you're really bad or whatever, because a lot of the kids came from homes where those, the F-bomb and all those words were dropped on a regular basis. So I wasn't trying to put down where they came from. I was just trying to say that this isn't appropriate for school, because my job is to make sure you get a job someday. And so what I would do if they cussed is they had to they had to stand up and they had to go out to the side it was in a portable most of the time. So they would have to stand at the door, outside the door, and they'd have to put their foot in the door so that I could see that they weren't running away. And then as soon as I got done teaching my lesson, because I wasn't going to give up instructional time to deal with that behavior, as soon as they got done with that lesson, I would go outside and I would say to them, I'd stand out on the porch and I would say, what is our rule in our classroom? And they would say, no cussing. And I would say, why do we have that rule? And they'd say, because it's not conducive to learning and you want me to get a job someday. And I'd say, yeah, can you do me a favor? They'd say, sure, what, Miss B? I'd say, could you go back in there and not cuss? And they'd say, yes, ma'am. I went down to from 20 cusses in an hour to 0. Matter of fact, one kid was, actually we were taking apart these old machines and stuff because we were trying to do a creative activity where we were taking everything apart to little pieces and then rebuilding something new. And he was taking it apart and he was using a hammer and he was trying to make some jewelry, and he was pounding some metal, and he hit his thumb, and his thumb just burst into, it just blood was everywhere. It's just dripping. And he cussed. I mean, when he hit his hand with the hammer, he cussed. And then I look over, and I think he's going to the nurse because, I mean, literally his fingers just gushing blood, like he's holding it with a little towel, but it's dripping. And I look out, and his foot is in the doorway. And I walked out there, and I'm like, what are you doing? Go to the nurse. And he goes, I cussed. And I go, yeah, baby, I know. And sometimes it's appropriate for you to cuss. Okay, just go to the nurse. And he's like, okay. I've had kids get up in the middle of a lecture and go stand outside. And I'm like, what are you doing? I walked out there and I go, what are you doing? They go, well, you didn't hear me, but I cussed. So they were starting to self-regulate. They were starting to enforce the rules themselves. I didn't have to yell at them. I didn't have to do anything. And I watched those behaviors go from, like I said, 30 an hour to 0, or 1 every couple months. So what do we do? How do we get to that effective classroom management? And practices that contribute to that are starting the year properly. That teacher that I just showed you that video clip of, she was actually teaching those prompts that the kids knew what to expect. So obviously you could tell by the words in her prompt that they have meaning. So she's going to use them at specific times. And that's helping develop that procedure that when she says something like that, you repeat it, and then it reminds the kids of what their behavior is supposed to be. Classroom rules and procedures should be explicitly presented to the students. Things like respect. A lot of teachers have rules called respect. You know, what does respect mean? I had a kid, I'd say respect others. And he would say, hey, butthead, get over here. I go, you know, John, I don't really think that's very respectful. And he'd go, why? My dad calls me that all the time. You know, so respect means different things to different people. And then classroom rules should be applied promptly, and they should be applied fairly. You can't do something to one kid and then not do it to another. It's just not fair. Now, let me go back to that. Fairness does not mean giving everybody the same thing, but it does mean giving everyone what they need. So even though like one kid maybe cusses a lot more, and I may not punish him, or I don't punish him for that, but I would come back and say, you know, like John came in cussing at 60 times an hour, and now he's down to 30 times. I'm still going to praise him because he's down to 30. Where, you know, Marcus may have come in and he only cussed 4 times, and now he's down to 1 time, and I'm still going to reprimand him, but I'm still going to praise him. But that jump is much, even though John's still doing it 30 times a day, it's decreased by 50%. So fairness isn't necessarily the same for everyone. It's giving them what they need. When we do set class rules, one of the first management tasks that you want to do is start off a class with class rules. So usually with me, I did it together. I would come in with a list of rules in my head that I wanted them to have. But I would usually, if I was working with little kids, I would say, you know, like, okay, boys and girls, we are going to have the best first grade class ever. Actually, I didn't like to teach first grade, so we'll say third. We're going to have the best third class ever. You know, and this is what we're going to learn this year, and I'm so excited about it. And what do you think we need? Like, what kind of rules and procedures do you think is going to make this the best year ever? And they would come up with some, and, you know, usually they would come up with, like, you know, oh, nobody can talk bad about one another. Okay, good. That would be good. You know, that we want to respect each other, right? Because bullying and making you feel bad about yourself isn't going to be the best year ever. So we would talk through all of those things. With high school kids, I would usually have them work in groups, and I would have them create a list of classroom rules, and then they had to tell me why they were creating that list, like what was the reasoning behind it that went along with it. But one of the things, the principles that you want to keep in mind when you're making classroom rules is, one, they have to be few in number. Remember when we go back to chapter 6, you can remember, average person remembers 7 bits of information. Between 5 and 9, with 7 being the average. But remember, you're going to have kids that 5 is the most they're ever going to be able to remember. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you don't have any more than 5, because 5 is going to tax somebody. Classroom rules should make sense, and they should be seen by students. I just watch what you're doing. I was in a kindergarten class. This is my favorite one. I had this little guy. His name was Marcus. He was so cute when I was a behavior specialist. And his teacher had pretty much scratched into the note. You know, Marcus is always out of his seat. I can't get him to do anything. He's constantly wandering around the classroom. He's driving me crazy. And I could tell she was like at her wit's end. So he's a little 5-year-old, cute as can be, big brown eyes, curly brown hair. And I said to him, Marcus, buddy, what's going on? I said, you got ants in your pants or something? And he looks at me very seriously because he's like 5, you know, and he goes, I don't have ants in my pants. I go, well, I know, but do you? I said, your teacher tells me that all you do is walk around the classroom all the time. And when she asks you to sit down, then you just get up and start walking around again. So what's going on? And he said, he got tears in his eyes, and he goes, well, she keeps telling me to get on task, and I'm breaking the rule of being on task, and I've been walking all around and I cannot find it anywhere. So he thought on task was a place that he had to stand, and he was walking around the classroom trying to find it everywhere. So I said to him, buddy, do you know what on task means? He goes, no, I can't find it anywhere. I started laughing, and which wasn't nice, but I started giggling. I said to him, honey, this is what I want you to do. When she says get on task, I said, who do you sit next to? And he told me this little girl, Susan. And I said, okay, I want you to look at, she was a good kid. I said, I want you to look at Susan, and I want you to tell me if you're doing the same thing that Susan is doing, like your book is open to the same page, or you've got your crayons out, or whatever is on her desk is the same things that are on your desk, the same kind of things that are on your desk, then you're on task. And I said, so I want you to just look around. Am I doing the same thing that all the other kids are doing? If you're doing the same thing all the other kids are doing, then you're going to be on task. It just means on task means you're doing what you're supposed to be doing. And he goes, oh, I can do that. And I said, okay, then we've got it, buddy. So you see, that rule didn't make sense to him being on task. He had no idea what that meant. And so he was wandering around looking for it. So class rules need to be clearly explained and deliberately taught to students, especially if you're in the upper grades and stuff like that, because class rules change from teacher to teacher. So you want to be cognizant that even though I've had 7th grade teachers and 6th grade teachers say to me, like, well, I don't have to post my rules because, every kid, they're in 7th grade. They've been in school for 8 years or 6 years or whatever it's been. And they said they should know what good, appropriate classroom behavior is by now. Well, you know what? It changes from classroom to classroom. One teacher wants you to put your name on the left-hand side of the paper. One wants you to put it in the right. One of them wants you to put it in a green box. One of them wants you to put it in a red box. One of them wants you to sit up. One of them wants you to raise your hand. One of them doesn't care if you raise your hand. They change all the time. So they have to be clearly explained and they have to be deliberately taught. One of the videos that is on our Torch video, which I was trying to link to the class, but I've been having difficulties, is Mrs. Dysinger is a 7th grade teacher. She taught 7th, 8th, and 9th. She's a middle school teacher. And she was Volusia County Teacher of the Year. She was the Social Study Teacher of the Year. She's really quite an amazing teacher. But she used to do something called Desk Olympics. And so the first thing that she would do was pull all the kids. She would say to the kids, get in your Lincoln configuration, which was groups of 3. And they knew exactly what kids to go into, and she would time them. In the beginning of the year, those first 2 weeks, she actually times them. Matter of fact, her husband's a lawyer, and during those first 2 weeks of school, while she's setting up all her routines and her, making sure all the kids know all the rules and procedures of her classroom, her husband, if her own children get sick, her husband has to stay home from work, and he's like a district prosecuting attorney. But that's the rules in their family, because if she doesn't set up those rules and procedures those first 2 weeks of school, she's pretty much going to be screwed the whole rest of the year, because the kids get trained in inappropriate ways. So she says to her husband, those first 2 weeks are mine. If the kids get sick, you stay home. So effective use of time, there's a lot of other things that we can do when we're doing that. We can do brief videos where we're showing little video clips, because that kind of changes up the matter. Interactive devices like we talked about before, clickers, kids using their phones for like Kahoot and stuff like that. Those are electronic response devices. Other interactive devices that kids have where they have interactive whiteboards. A lot of centers, kids will use centers for interactive whiteboards and stuff like that. Getting kids moving is a good idea, like incorporating movement into your class. One of the things that we do is something called a brain break. In kindergarten, we suggest that you start out with every 10 minutes where the kids get up and they move a little bit, because what happens during the day is children go into something naturally called a neuro rest state. If you've ever read a paragraph or two and then you get to the bottom of the page and you realize that you have no idea what you just read, more than likely you were in a neuro rest state, and it's really common. Or you're in a classroom, and even though you want to pay attention, you just can't stop yourself from falling asleep. You're probably doing it right now. You're listening to this video. That's called a neuro rest state, and it's really normal for you to get a neuro rest state. So one of the things that you want to do is like get up and stretch and move around, because it forces your brain to stay awake. That's why those little chants, like I showed you a minute ago with that teacher, that you do kind of perks the kids up and gets them, like refocuses them. So Ron Clark's, when he says shark bait and they go, whoo, ah, that's just this little way of re-energizing the brain and doing that.